Prior to that, I taught for 9 years at Logan High School, and then was the Dean of Students for 3 years at Logan Middle School. Coached football for many years as well.
I'm Rachel Fawver. I taught 8th grade language arts in Yale at Trempealeau. There was a short stint I taught math and science as well, and luckily I moved my way into ELA where my comfort zone was. Then I became the principal at Ettrick Elementary and director of instruction for the district, and was there for 3 years. And now I am in my 2nd year at Evergreen in Holman.
And I'm the old man. My name's Greg Zimmerman, and I'm the middle and high school principal at Hillsboro. I'm Christy's husband. And I started teaching back in 1985, classroom teacher for 9 years. Got my degree in leadership. We moved our family up north. We were in Osceola, Wisconsin. I was middle school principal there. Moved back to Hillsboro in 2001 and have been there ever since as building principal, middle and high school. It was 7-12. 6th grade came over 3 years ago, so now it's 6-12.
Thank you very much. Do you want to start, Laura, with the questions?
Sure. How do you find time within the school day to meet with all of the PLCs? If you have schedules you can share with us that we can help this with. That's probably our biggest concern is we see the value, but kind of find the time.
I'll start. We have 13 different PLCs, so it's not something where, even on during our collaboration weeks or even on our PD days that I'm getting to all 13. In our case, we do have associate principal and an activities director, and we do divide out supervision of different PLCs. But even with that said, in the collaboration week, I'm not spending an hour with each of the PLCs. It's very targeted, where this is where I'm coming in for this specific purpose, for questions, for resources, for problem solving, and then moving on after that. In terms of where the PLC owns it, before and after, obviously I'm there.
Yeah, the answer is how do you find time? Well, you don't always find time. In our building, we PLC twice a week by grade level. And so again, I'm similar. I have targeted situations where I want to come in or things that I want to emphasize with the team, especially early on in the school year. But as far as to making it to every PLC, I don't. We do, in my building, we communicate out our minutes to everyone. So if 6th grade meets, they don't just communicate the minutes to 6th grade, it's the entire building that they communicate their minutes out to. But I also have a lead teacher who does go to each and every meeting, and that's one of her roles, is to make sure that we're answering 4 essential questions, that we're on task, that it's not just a collegial meeting, but that we are truly PLCing. And that's a process. That's not something, when I first got hired, it was one of the things that we really needed to work on, and we're continuing to work on. It's not something where you just cross it off the grocery list and you're done and you move on down the aisle. It's a continuous process that you keep working on. So.
I would say that there's not a whole lot of difference at the elementary level from what you've already shared. However, we have, I would say, really 2 PLC times a week, but one is very data-driven, where both should be, and I hope are data-driven, but we're looking really at our interventions and enrichment opportunities for students, where we have our school psych there, our counselor comes at times, our behavior resource comes at times, so we have more of our supports come to that meeting, and that's pretty close to weekly, and then each PLC also meets weekly. And there are times I go in and I have targeted items I need to address, but the one difference I would say is that I really try and just sit in. So when I come in, I don't want the PLC to think I'm there for a targeted purpose, and I let them know ahead of time. I'm sure you guys do as needed too, but that if I need something specifically, and that's really because of the culture I walked into. There were minutes expected to be turned in maybe they were not capturing the conversations because we weren't doing the true work of a PLC. So much like Ben, we've been working hard the last year and a half on what a PLC really does and focusing on the 4 essential questions during that time. So reason being, I'm there to support them functioning as a PLC. So if I come in with targeted items, I'm not supporting that learning.
We set aside our PLC time every Friday from 2:15 to 3:30. We started off trying to do it before school 1 day a week, and it just wasn't working. So as administration, we approached the board about setting time aside, having an early release on Friday, which is a commitment to the community with parents. But it's really worked. We've had it the last 3 years. Since we're a small district, our PLCs require us to move from building to building to cover curricular areas. I try not to sit in on all meetings. I try to just kind of stop and spend a few minutes at each meeting. I don't like to sit in on an entire meeting because as an administrator, sometimes the focus is they turn and look to the principal to run everything. And that's not what it's for. It's supposed to be a professional learning community. It's not supposed to be driven by the administrator. And I think we've been very successful looking at data, dealing with interventions, as you mentioned, and from time to time situations come up that just require teachers to get together and talk.
One thing I'll say is you asked, how do we find time? And I think the simplest answer is you have to schedule it.
Yeah.
If it's not on your calendar or in your list of priorities, you're not going to make it. I don't know.
Yeah, I would echo that. If you don't schedule it, urgent matters will bump important matters. So you have to schedule it. I mean, you'll find out as you go into administration, you could stay until 10 o'clock every night, and if you would be working every night until 10 o'clock on something if you chose to stay that late. I mean, there's always going to be something to do. You're never, oh, this is all done. I have nothing I need to accomplish anymore. I'm good. And that's not going to happen. So I would agree. You have to schedule it.
I have a question that's kind of related to that. You all mentioned having teachers, you said that you drop in for targeted times, but the rest of the time you let the teachers lead it. How did you pick those teachers, and did you actually explicitly train them to do that, or did you just kind of see who was already ready for that role?
What level are you at?
High school.
Your turn.
See how that works?
See, asking questions, that's a good technique.
I think there's a lot of PLC that happens outside the PLC, and I think that's the piece that I've learned the most in the last Onalaska kind of formally started 8 years ago, which was a great transition as I came into, starting at the same time, and my knowledge and growth as well as the staff. And there's a lot of discussions that take place in the PLC, but then a lot of discussions, a lot of follow-ups that take place outside the PLC, a lot of front-loading that takes place before the PLC, and how do you train? Asking the question, how are you going to approach this with your team? What's the best way to bring this up? What's the best data to show? What's the best thing to request people to bring? I think we've gotten a lot better at knowing how important the agenda is in advance and making sure people are aware of what's coming. One of my rules, with our department chairs or with the teams that I'm part of now too, is that if it's not on the agenda, we don't talk about it. And the reason for that is it's not fair that something gets dumped that no one has time to think about. It leads to impulsive decisions. It can lead to miscommunication. It can lead to a lot of anxiety. And I think it, specifically with one group that we just changed that norm with about 3 weeks ago, it leads to a lot better time spent as opposed to kind of thinking about where we're going to feel in the dark next with it. But I think there has to be a lot of coaching and training and feedback, and what do you need from me? What do you need from someone else? Do you want to observe a different person to see how they're doing this?
Good, thanks.
And do you want to do yours?
How do you go about developing transparency and trust in the use of data among your staff members?
I think that in my experiences, it's a lot scarier than it actually is once you're looking at the data together. I have done everything from having people submit data anonymously at a grade level so that we can start to look at data and realize that we don't have these humongous gaps that we're fearful of between one another, and we can learn from each other. To having them submit it with their names, but I remove the names so that I can have the conversations and lead the appropriate staff development or conversations that are needed. To then sharing data within a grade level and being comfortable with it. And then at Evergreen, I would say that wasn't needed as drastically, but my first situation was as director of instruction, so I was leading conversations across district. And so it's not just within a building where you have that security. And at Evergreen, there was just more of a comfort in sharing data, and that has been established across the district already, which was really nice. But I would say that the story was bigger in my head in both cases of how scared people were going to be and uncomfortable they were going to be than was actually the case.
Angela, and the next question.
Number 3, compensation. What is the motivation you give to your PLC leader?
For them, for staff.
Do you guys compensate for team leaders, PLC leaders?
We do for team leaders, but it's not much. It has to be a calling. Like anything else in education, I believe, it has to be a calling. If they're going to be a PLC leader for the money and that's their driving force, then they're not going to be very effective if they're just looking at dollar signs. It has to be a calling in what's best for kids, and then wanting to step up and take a leadership role in doing what's best for kids and to move the needle for learning. I walked into a situation where they rotate PLC leaders. And I didn't make any changes to that because I just wanted to see how that worked. And I'll talk with staff towards the end of the year and see how do you want to rotate. These are the expectations of our PLCs moving forward. Is this something that you want to pass on as a team? Is this something that we want to just assign to a person? I'll give them some input on that. But I don't think in most districts you're going to have enough compensation for that to be a real motivator. I think it can act as kind of a thank you for your service kind of thing, but people have to lead with, kind of that servant leadership mentality, which Viterbo, it's kind of a cornerstone of Viterbo.
Well, leaders emerge in any organization, and I and the reading specialist in my building, we develop the PLC schedule for every Friday. We don't compensate, but it's during school time, and I think our teachers realize this is what we need to do. Our leaders emerge based upon what we need to address in our PLC. And people have different motivations, they have different interests, and so we allow them to lead when that arises. And I think that's part of that shared leadership that we have, and I embrace that. I don't really want anybody just taking over a PLC and dominating it every Friday. So.
We do not provide extra compensation per se. In some cases, our team leaders who are compensated are the PLC leaders. In other cases, they're not. In other cases, there's a lot of ownership as a PLC leader and team leader. In other cases, it's not, so there's not specific compensation for it.
Question for Mr. Zimmerman. For your PLC, like Onalaska Middle School has BLT, building leadership committees, teams. In a smaller district, do you have your PLC leaders together as a team, or do you just meet together?
It shifts. It changes. It could be by department. It could be by special education.